Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. I'm Lindy, and I love to talk about books. I'm coming up to nearly 1 year on BookTube. I think December 31st will be my 1 year anniversary. And if you're new to my channel, I usually do a weekly wrap-up on Fridays, Friday Reads, and occasional videos in between. I have had such a nice, quiet Christmas that I've already got 6 books to talk about since Friday, and it's only Monday. So I'm going to do a recent reads today. And before I tell you about books, there hasn't been much going on here. A quiet Christmas, which is exactly how I like it. My sweetie and I, neither of us are religious. We don't exchange gifts anymore. What we do instead is we talk about which charities we'd like to donate to, and that's what we do in lieu of gift giving. And the only other excitement around here has been that we've had an extra dog. So our little dog Joni turned 1 year old on Christmas Eve, and we've had her mother staying with us for a few days. She'll be here for a week while her people are off traveling over Christmas. So, extra dog, it's fun. So my big reading project through December has been the short story Advent calendar, reading 1 short story a day. I've talked about that in previous videos this month. So here's my general wrap-up. Loved it. A lot of times with an anthology, you have the hit and miss. This time, it was such a good selection. The editor is Michael Hingston, and the designer is Natalie Olsen. They have put together fabulous collection this year. I wasn't quite as happy last year. They had a guest editor, Alberto Manuel, and it was his taste of more Jorge Borges kind of stories. This time, still very literary stories. None of them are religious. They all just tickled me in the right way. Some of them are more classic, like there was this Christopher Morley Parnassus on Wheels, which is actually a chapter from a novel, and some Victorian writers, Robert Louis Stevenson's Marking, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, short story about a guy who likes to make explosives. And one of my recent favorite Canadian authors, the non-binary author John Elizabeth Stintsey, with the short story Moving Parts. This one is about a young person who, when they left the farm where they grew up in order to go to college, left up their pinky finger behind. And each time they go back home and leave, some other parts of their body gets left behind. So a very allegorical sort of story. But strangely, it connected with Anne-Marie MacDonald's Fayne, which I read last week. And in it, there's a person who wonders if a little finger is cut off, would it regenerate? And I was reading that section at the same time, the same day that I had read that short story by John Elizabeth Stintsey. I love that kind of serendipity. So what else? There's, Ruby Cowling's story, Autumn on Till. Now, this was December 11th, and at the same time I was reading Manjit Thapp's Feelings, and within this is a story about an alien who is just learning about humans, and pain is one of the things that he's learning to recognize. He says, sometimes it was a shadowy mesh draping itself around a person, thickening as the day went on. Sometimes a hot blue light flashing inside. And he can see it, but he realizes that the humans can't. Well, this is an image from Manjit Thapp's book that just went with this story so well. Another excellent pairing is Claire Beam's story, Milk. And I was reading this at around the time that I read Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait. And Milk is set in Renaissance times, and it is about a wet nurse who is nursing a prince, just the era, and there is also the political machinations going on in Milk that tie quite nicely to A Marriage Portrait. I really liked the story from December 13th by Vanita Blackburn, Not a Donut. And it's about a man in his 60s who's a single dad raising a son who's nearly 30, but he's a very high needs kind of person, can't live alone. And it's definitely a story that'll stick with me. Oh, Lucy Ellman's short story, Olive Oil. Oh, this was great. It was great. So Popeye was nautical but nice. Here's a section where Olive Oil has been living on her own in kind of like a gazebo thing in the woods. Out for a walk in the woods one fateful Christmas day in early womanhood, Little Red Riding Hood, but not so little, Olive heard a rustling in the bushes, then footsteps, heavy footsteps. She paused. Though far from the casting couches of Hollywood, she was nonetheless wary and resented the invasion of her rural idyll. I grew up on Popeye cartoons, and I love Olive Oil too. Here's another one of day 19, Kynan Jones, who's a Welsh author, and his story, Reindeer. This one is like nature writing with a touch of the fantastical and a bit of horror, and it actually had, for me, Olga Tokarczuk vibes. So good. And the last one I'll tell you about is Erica Swiler's story, Good Neighbors, which is about deer moving into the suburbs. I mean, like, really moving in to the house next door. And that added an interesting layer to this novel that I picked up in the past few days, Cary Fagan's The Animals. Cary Fagan is a Jewish-Canadian author. I think his most recent novel was The Student. This one is quite different, although it's another short one. This one is more surreal and fable-like. It is set in this quaint village that's a tourist attraction. They keep it quaint on purpose, and Dorn, the central character, makes these little miniature scenes. So one of the things going on is this Wild Home Project, which is sponsored by the government and encourages people to take wild animals into their homes, and that part of the rules, if if you sign up for it, is you cannot cage or restrain these wild animals in any way. We're talking bears, wolves, minks. Craziness. Anyway, the exploration of relationships between people and between people and animals are well done, very thought-provoking. To get an idea of his style, I'll just read a little bit from here. Dorn walked 1 block south and turned off the main street. At that corner, he passed Sizzle's bookshop, the only long-established business that did not have one of his miniature models on display. In fact, Old Man Sizzle denounced all of the village's attempts to sell this bullshit nostalgia, and Dorn couldn't help admiring him for it. There was nothing at all quaint about his bookshop, which had the ambiance of a discount shoe store with its linoleum floor, metal shelves, crowded aisles. It wasn't unusual to encounter a dead mouse in a corner trap. The books were stacked vertically in piles, making the lower volumes difficult to retrieve. I didn't like this quite as well as The Student, but still I found it charming and thought-provoking. And Cary Fagan had another book come out this year. Yeah, 2 books in 2022, one for adults, and then this one is for kids, about grades 3 to 5, I would say. It's called Water, Water, and it has illustrations in it by John MacDonald. They look like they're sort of woodcut type. And it is a chapter book that actually would make good bedtime reading, chapter by chapter, because there's a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of each. And it's another surreal kind of story. Actually, I wonder if it was inspired by kids being shut up during lockdown, during COVID. It opens with Raph, who's about 12 years old. He wakes up and his bedroom has separated from the rest of the house. He doesn't know what's happened to the rest of the house. When he looks outside, he sees that his room is floating on an ocean. He's got his dog with him, but other than that, there's no one else to be seen. So these are his adventures on the ocean. How do they find stuff to eat, and other people floating by and their interactions with them. A strange story that I don't think will appeal to every child, but like I said, as a bedtime read aloud, I certainly can see how this would have appeal, plus be something that would provoke discussion. And then totally coincidentally, these titles. So Water, Water, Eddy, Eddy. Kate de Goldi's Eddy, Eddy is an adult novel that's almost YA adjacent, let's say, that very loosely mirrors Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It is set in Christchurch, New Zealand after the earthquakes, and that aspect of the city that with buildings that have been torn down, buildings that are boarded up, streets that are in terrible repair with orange cones everywhere, and sewers and waterworks, that kind of infrastructure always needing to be repaired. That's definitely part of this story. It's about Eddy, who's 19 years old. He is basically an orphan. His parents are out of the picture, and he's been raised by his uncle Brian, who gets called Brain in this book. There's lots of playful language. Now, his uncle is a librarian, and he's really into classic literature and classical music, and loves Eddy so much. And you can tell that Eddy really cares about his uncle too, but he's also really irritated by him. And that kind of tension is really well described. So Eddy has left school but not gone off to university. He's working in a grocery store, and also he's got this pet minding business. He loves animals. The pets that he's minding, there's dogs and cats, but there's also this cockatoo, there's a frog, and some hens. And he gets involved with the people that he's working for as well. The whole cast of characters is excellent, kind of on the quirky side, I would say. The storytelling is so buoyant and tender and richly layered, just pure delight, especially if you love language. He's got his best friend, Thomas Moore, who's quite a character. There are two really good things about dog walking, Eddy had once told Thomas Moore. Let me guess, said Thomas. He languished, pale and interesting on his bed, like the death of Chatterton, only without the lilac trousers. Thomas is recovering from a bout with salmonella. And I had to look up that the death of Chatterton, discovered that it's a painting, but looking at that painting, I realized I think there's a tie to it in Fayne that I hadn't caught when I read that passage in Fayne, and it is where Charlotte's father goes courting, and he's wearing lilac trousers. Here's another passage with Thomas. Eddy's grandmother has died, and he's been given her old car once the estate is settled. But was a yellow car really a generous gift? Briefly, Eddy contemplated a paint job, but it would still be a Suzuki, a flimsy toy car. Thomas Moore occasionally refused to get in it. It compromises my masculinity. What masculinity? True, said Thomas, but still. And for those of you who are Georgette Heyer fans, it turns out that Eddy's girlfriend, Boo, and Eddy's uncle, Brain, have bonded over Georgette Heyer novels, to Eddy's eternal puzzlement. But Arabella proved strangely compelling. I accidentally read a Georgette Heyer, he said to Boo now. Were you sick? Kinda. Which one? Arabella. And then I read the Grand Sophie, and then Frederica. 3. That's a terminal illness. Kinda. Back home, Eddy had gone to Brain's Georgette Heyer collection, complete, and found the other titles, each of which he read to the end, wondering all the while if he was perhaps having an unusual kind of nervous breakdown. The respective heroines flirted in curlicue sentences, wore Regency dress and chignons with winsome curls, but all of them somehow had Boo's busy face and boldness. It was like visiting Boo in action on the set of a costume drama, a would-be pleasure wreathed in gloom. And almost made me want to try Georgette Hare. So Boo works at a knitting shop, and one time when Eddy is waiting for her, he's looking at this book that's on display. Knitted Wild Animals. Projects have an adorable, humorous quality, the back of the book assured him. Will amuse children and adults alike. He turned the pages, testing his amusement. Low. Knitting up wild animals instantly tamed them. They looked stupidly phlegmatic, like all soft toys. And of course, I had to check to see if there was such a book. I found several books about knitting wild animals, and I'm kind of tempted to try maybe a bison or something like that, if I can get my hands on a copy. And one more reference to, I guess we could call them classic books. In Boo's grandmother's Hokitika spare bedroom, there were 72 Bobbsey twin books, originally collected by her grandmother, and Boo had read them all many times. For Year 13 English, she had written an essay titled Race, Gender, and Class in the Bobbsey Twins, and argued, among much else, that Danny Rugg, the school bully, was the true embodiment of America in the stories, not the cherubic-faced, white-bread, mystery-solving double set of twins. Eddy had been mildly scandalized that Boo could write about crap children's books, but impressed by her argument. When I was a kid, I think maybe grade 4 or 5, I read every Bobbsey Twins in the library. So, did you do that? There are New Zealand references in here that I had to look up, like a perky nana. And I discovered that it is a banana-flavored candy bar, a chewy bar coated in milk chocolate, which sounds disgusting. And at the Christmas tree decorating party, a neighbor brought over deviled prunes, which I discovered are prunes that are wrapped in bacon, which also sounds disgusting. The bacon part. And there's lots of fancy words like termagant and concatenation and etiolated. And my language-loving soul loved it, but also just the pure human joy in connection and how the people around us help us to recover from grief. Next up is a collection of poetry by Jake Skeets, who is a young queer indigenous writer from New Mexico. He's Navajo or Diné, and these poems are quite sparse and fragmentary. There's violence and wildflowers, there's trucks and pipelines and so much burning. It's like everything's on fire. The New Mexico landscape is definitely entwined in these stories, as well as the man who's on the cover. This is Jake Skeets' uncle, James Benson. It was Richard Avedon who took his photo in Gallup, New Mexico, in 1979. And then it was published in a book in 1985, which was sent to James Benson, but he had already been dead 5 years by that time. I forgot to say the title. Eyes Bottle Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers. I think the best way for me to explain it is for me to read a little bit. So, This is an excerpt from a longer poem. Fingers, lupine, beard's tongue, bee plant in harrow grasses, pronghorn in wild rose, truck radio, more seagull lily, and pigweed spewing from open mouth. Boys watch rice grass shimmer in smoke, fires everywhere around them, arms stretch in sap and bark. Hair now meadow, limbs tangle into snakeweed, burning, 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 burning. They know becoming a man means knowing how to become charcoal, staccato of ash, holding a match to their skin, trying not to light themselves on fire. And one more little bit. I learned to touch a man by touching myself. I learned to be a man by loving one. It's Jake Skeets. My best book of the week is this work of nonfiction, The Invisible Siege, The Rise of Coronaviruses and the Search for a Cure. And it's by Dan Werb. And I am going to pop the audiobook cover in here because of its shininess. And I did this as a combo, going back and forth between the two and occasionally listening and reading at the same time. I wasn't sure if I would find this interesting, but I saw that it won the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for nonfiction in Canada, and I'll give it a try. It is fascinating. Coronaviruses date back millennia, and there are some pandemics, like one that was in China that lasted about 80 years in the 10th or 11th century, that they're pretty sure was caused by a coronavirus, and what was called the Russian flu, but now they think it was a coronavirus. There are scientists in here who were studying coronaviruses as, it was kind of like a backwater of science. It wasn't nothing flashy about it until SARS, and then MERS, and then the most recent coronavirus. So in the section where he's talking about MERS, in I think it was 2013, sometime around then, it emerged in Saudi Arabia, and scientists wanted to figure out where it came from and suspected bats. Well, they were blocked from even getting into Saudi Arabia. Number one, they were told there are no bats here, which was false. So first the scientists had to capture a bunch of bats, lots of different species of bats, to prove, yes, there are bats. And then they tested them. So they suspected bats, but there wasn't a close match. And instead, it was camels. So I learned that in Saudi Arabia, camels are worth as much as $4 million a piece. They have camel racing and also camel beauty contests. And in 2018, 12 camels were banned from the annual King Abdulaziz Camel Festival contest, vying for a $57 million purse, when it was discovered that their owners had injected them with Botox. So there's cute facts like that. And what happened with hydroxychloroquine and President Trump, the development of vaccines, which after reading this, I felt like I had much more context, because it seemed like, how did they get those vaccines so fast within 9 months of COVID-19 bursting out? But they were building on work that these scientists had been doing for decades. There's also the question about where COVID-19 emerged from, whether it was bats or pangolins or other animals at the wet market, or whether it had escaped from a lab in Wuhan, a virology lab. So that's in the epilogue at the end. It is written so compelling, like a page turner, and I was really surprised at how much I loved this. And I was just so enamored with it. I kept telling my friends, did you know this? Did you know that? Yeah, really good. Really good. So, those are the books that I finished in the last few days. I've still got lots on the go that I will talk about on Friday. So, my usual Friday reads is coming up. Meanwhile, if you are having some time off work, I hope you are relaxing. I hope you find some time to read. And I look forward to your comments, as always. And I will see you again soon. Bye for now.